A Nintendo 64 Classic is likely on the way.
But what do we think?
Hot take.
A European trademark has been confirmed for a Classic Edition, along with an image that looks like an N64 controller. It is an N64.
Yeah, it really is. It's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
We kind of theorized about this when we were looking at the PlayStation Classic. I said, I think we coined the Classic Wars.
The Classic, and I've seen that.
Yeah.
I don't know if they watched, but people are talking about the Classic Console Wars now because of the possibility of these guys going head to head.
I think that's what we're going to see here. This is a weird time. I mean, we saw this
happen.
Time. Yeah, we saw this happen originally in live. Like, we were there back when they were actually releasing these systems. And to know that Nintendo is probably likely going to be making a Nintendo 64 Classic is pretty exciting. Now, there's a lot to talk about here, but let's get a little bit more into the other things that we've kind of theorized too.
Okay, so we know that there's a trademark for a Classic Edition console, and we know that there's that image for the N64 controller. Now, that image is in the same sort of vein as the other image for the SNES Classic controller, so I think it's the one that goes on the box, right? Yes. So I believe that the N64 controller is the image that we're going to see on the top of the Classic Edition box for the N64. Okay, we know that most of the Classic Edition consoles, they're announced about 3 to 4 months before they're released. It's been that way for the SNES Classic, and it's been that way for the NES Classic. So I'm assuming that we need about a 3 to 4 month buffer, probably closer to 3 months, if we want to see the N64 Classic coming out. So I think if we're to see an N64 compete with the PS1 Classic, an announcement for this has to be due like within the coming weeks or days. Like it's crunch time for Nintendo, I guess.
I believe Adam 100% on this. I'm totally with him because this seriously has to happen. Look, Sony announcing a PlayStation Classic means that the branding identity of what Nintendo is doing is up for challenge.
Oh, for sure.
So if Sony sees success releasing a classic system, that's going to open up the floodgates to other people releasing classic systems and basically watering down what Nintendo has built with their own classic lineup. Now, of course, Nintendo has used classic in the past before the classic systems, and the name classic has been used by PlayStation in the past as well.
Right. Their online store, they have the PS1 Classics.
Yes. Yeah. So they can use this, all right? It's not that they can't, but Nintendo has to fight for it.
Yeah.
Right? There's no going around this. And I know there's a couple of you out there are just like, well, the N64 versus the PlayStation, I'm pretty sure Nintendo's going to have that. I don't think it's going to play that way.
If you want to ask me, you might be getting a biased response because I'm a huge fan of the PlayStation 1. But I will never deny that the N64 had a pretty amazing library of games, and it is one of the best-selling consoles.
Which just not the best of Nintendo's.
Yeah.
See, now how this works out is when PlayStation hit the scene, it had a huge impact. When the Nintendo 64 hit the scene, it had less of an impact compared to its predecessors. You go from NES, SNES, Nintendo 64, GameCube. The GameCube wasn't a very successful system. We have lots of fond memories of it now. And the same thing with Nintendo 64, but the Nintendo 64 is kind of a weird thing. Now, there are a number of issues we have to address right up front about this. So where Sony can pretty much get any game under the sun and bring it on the Classic if they so deem it appropriate, maybe. Nintendo... Well, you know what I mean.
Within reason.
Within reason.
Yeah.
Many of those companies still work with Sony, right? Like, that's just the thing.
They've had very good relationships with their third-party developers.
You got to understand this, folks. Sony isn't the kind of company to kick folks down. Like, they don't do that. They're just like, you want a game to release on the platform? Here, make it happen, right? That's all it is. But Nintendo...
Unless you want crossplay.
Yeah. Then it's a thing. But Nintendo has done some questionable things with developers in the past. Right. The whole reason the PlayStation exists in the first place is because Nintendo was like, hey, Sony, and like they completely made it happen. Right. They built the PlayStation like that is their cross to bear.
I think it was great of them to team up with Philips instead of Sony back then.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That was a mistake. But look, Here's the thing that I'm basically talking about right now. Mostly, all the games we've talked about on the PlayStation that we love, as long as the rights aren't in some weird place, they could probably find the holding company of the company and work with them, get it back. But when it comes to Nintendo, they're not going to get some certain Rare games. Now, when it comes to GoldenEye 007, which is a game everybody wants on the Nintendo 64 Classic, that's likely not going to happen.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. So there's Rare, who developed the GoldenEye, who's now a part of Microsoft. But then there's also the intellectual property that is James Bond 007.
Which is Sony.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, it's a problem. Yeah. And look, there are a whole bunch of other companies in between all of those things with that specific license to make all this happen. So there is a lot going on there. Now, both Adam and I have made a video about an idea of a Nintendo Classic.
Way back when.
Yeah.
But like 9 or 10 months ago.
Yeah, actually, quite a while back. But we felt we did a pretty good job of like covering all of our initial thoughts and what games we'd like to see on that.
Yeah.
So we're going to link that. It's going to be the first comment down there. I will link it, and you guys can watch it and tell us what you think about it.
We don't need to repeat ourselves.
Yeah. But we did have a lot of comments about that because we specifically didn't mention certain games. Like, look, if you're interested in playing Banjo-Kazooie, hey, guess what? Get an Xbox One. Okay, that's the best way to play it right now. It really is. They've done a fantastic job.
It's the best way, and if you want to play the HD versions of these games, it's the only way.
Yeah.
The only official way.
Yeah, the Xbox 360 and the Xbox One have it. Rare Replay.
Replay.
Rare Replay has a bunch of those old Rare games back again. Perfect Dark, don't play the Nintendo 64 version. Perfect Dark on the Xbox is a far better experience, higher frame rate, looks fantastic, and it really stays true to what the original game was like.
Yeah, so here's the thing I'm thinking, though, Shane. Despite, I agree with you, third parties are always going to be an issue as far as, Nintendo's history and bringing those to a classic console. But all it needs is 20 games, and I feel like we can still get 20 really good games.
Sure, and we did. We did do that in the video.
Right, that's exactly what we did. So I still, this is going to be strange.
No, it is.
Because, yes, I feel like Sony can draw from so much more, but I feel like there's just so much, every time there's a Nintendo thing, there's so much fervor for Nintendo. Everyone wants a Nintendo item, especially a classic item, that if they're going head-to-head, this is going to be a very interesting battle, man.
So if we're going to treat this like it's a sporting event,
and it feels like it.
It really does.
Yeah.
Let's
rip off our shirts, Nintendo, PS1. No, I'd probably be PS1.
Here's what's going to happen, all right? Sony already kind of shot themselves in the foot by not having a DualShock controller in the bundle. Okay, that was a mistake. There's a lot of games that make use of that controller. I don't know why Sony did this, because for them the Classic is the original controller, and I assume I get that. But just like the Nintendo 64 Classic, you have to have the Rumble Pack built into the controller. You cannot, and let me stress this, you cannot release the Nintendo 64 controller without Rumble Pack support, because so many games made use of it, and it was such a core fundamental feature of that.
So the way that we're talking about things, we could really see quite a bit of price discrepancy between these two consoles. Because,
absolutely.
Okay, we know that the PS1 Classic's coming in at $99.99, $100 US. If they're going to be doing the N64 Classic, I'm thinking it's going to be more expensive, because I still believe that there will be rumble capabilities within the controller.
Yes.
And we have to keep in mind that there's far more components going into this thing.
Yes.
Because we got our stick with the N64 Classic as well.
Now, I don't believe we're getting the original Nintendo 64 stick. The original model of the Nintendo 64 stick is actually built in a weird way that most people don't realize. This is a controversial thing to say. The original Nintendo 64 analog stick is technically not analog, it's digital, but a lot of people always put that up for debate. But how it works is there's actually a pinwheel inside the controller when you move forward and back, and there's an LED light dial that basically adjusts every time you move it around. It's a complex thing, but all you really need to know is real analog joysticks were really expensive, so they couldn't put it inside that little thing, so they created something else. If you've ever noticed this, with the original Nintendo 64 joysticks, if you rub them around a bit and the plastic would come off.
Yeah, the dust.
That dust would get stuck in the pinholes and the controller wouldn't work. It's technically a digital joystick, right? That's what it is. Analog is a different technology, and analog joysticks had existed for years prior to that, especially in jet fighters and stuff like that. So it's not an old tech, a new tech. It was something that existed previously.
So Shane, do you feel like they're going to switch it up? No pun intended. Do you feel like they're going to put an analog control stick and maybe fix that powder issue that we all loved from the late 90s?
They're not using the original controller design. I cannot imagine they would do that. That's an expensive proposition.
Right. And we know, simple things. Of course, the cable is going to be different because they just have been for all the classic controllers.
I think that what I've seen modern Nintendo 64 controllers made where they actually make use of modern analog sticks, putting them in the controllers, and they work fairly well. I think that's more in tune with what we're going to see here. The controller is one of the most, like the actual N64 box itself, whatever processing power is in there to emulate in old Nintendo 64 games, that's going to be a thing. Now, interesting enough, rendering old PlayStation games, emulating them, we actually have a lot of examples of that working straight from Nintendo, where it be through the PlayStation 3 directly, through the PlayStation 2, even with the PSP and the Vita. That stuff exists. We have software.
You said
versions of
Nintendo,
those.
you meant Sony though, right?
Sorry, I meant Sony, yeah. We have lots of examples of that stuff working already.
Right.
When it comes to Nintendo, though, the examples we have of Nintendo 64 emulation are a mixed bag. They are not the same kind of exact examples you would have got with the original hardware. So I'm actually very interested to see what Nintendo does with that. Now, with all that being said, one big problem that we're going to have with the original PlayStation is that, if from the way Nintendo would look at it, Nintendo is basically going to be making a very difficult little portable system with a very hard, complex controller to kind of make, in a package like this.
Right.
And then, to be fair, you don't have all the games there that you're probably going to want. I mean, for me, right off the top, Perfect Dark would be important for me.
It's not going to be there.
And GoldenEye would be. I mean, we're going to get Smash Brothers, but Smash Brothers, the first game, is good. It's just Melee is so much better. You're going to get Mario Kart 64. I mean, without a doubt, you're going to get that.
I feel like you're going to get most of the first-party greatness that we've seen. And maybe some things that, some other things like Mischief Makers or maybe a couple of other third-party titles as well.
I just feel you're going to see a lot of misses there. You're going to see a lot of people that are going to miss things that they really like.
We can't properly do the battle until we see what both systems are offering. So right now, all we can really do is speculate. One thing, though, is that, this N64 Classic, with the other classic systems, I think Nintendo didn't realize what they were doing, right? They knew, maybe some people will pick these up. They made a small run of those consoles. They'll start talking about Nintendo, then they'll pick up the Switch, because they remember Nintendo, right? But they sold so well. They were fairly cheap to manufacture. Now, I think things have changed dramatically. So not only are the methods to input, like the controller is going to be more expensive, it has to be, but also just shipping these things, you're not going to be in the same box as the other boxes, right?
True.
And so many things are changing. Even little things like that can really add to expenses. So if Nintendo is going to be pushing this N64 Classic, they really want to make sure that this thing sells, especially if there's a competitor on the market. So if they can find that Star Fox 2 for this thing, that thing to drive sales, because it's brand new, it's never been seen maybe in North American markets.
And let's be fair.
Well.
Let's be fair. Releasing any kind of device like this at the same time they have the Switch on the market isn't really the smartest idea in the world, because they basically have three classic systems out on the market on the same around the same time that they had the Switch. And you're starting to build a really complex case there of why aren't you just making these released on a digital console or a digital storefront for us to purchase on the Switch? I mean, you're not making these systems portable. Look, the N64 controller is going to be expensive. They're going to be able to bring down the costs, obviously, but they haven't worked with that controller in a while. There's a lot up there, right? There's a lot of things that are going to be confusing around. Now, with the PlayStation Classic, something that was brought up that made a lot of sense to me was that originally Sony actually had a lawsuit happen with Immersion, the people that actually created feedback technology. Right. Now, Immersion is this company that has the patent on this stuff. They invented it. That's how it goes, and it's not a patent troll or anything. They literally created that technology. It's their thing. So one of the problems is that Sony had this huge battle with them, and that's theorized to be one of the reasons why the PlayStation 3 controllers originally didn't have vibration in them. So the idea with the new PlayStation Classic is that they didn't want to put that technology in the controller because they might actually have to pay them.
Yeah, so it wasn't just an expense issue on manufacturing the device. It could be because of the legality issues.
Yes. So does Nintendo have to pay Immersion? Because that's the same idea. Do they just not put vibration packs in the controller itself? Are people going to be upset about that?
They will.
Look, the Nintendo 64 is already going to lose a little bit of that library. I think at this point, they need to stick as close to the original vision as possible to get people as excited.
And if you're sticking as close to the original vision as you can, Okay, is the N64 Classic going to have 2 controllers in the box? I don't think so. But they're going to need to, like a lot of the best games on that system had multiplayer functionality. So they're also, I believe, going to have to release those single controllers to buy as well, separately. And that adds to the cost.
It does. And the price of this thing has to compete against the PlayStation Classic.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It can't be more expensive, and it can't be less well, it can be less expensive, but it just can't be more.
Yeah, I'm already calling it that it's probably going to be more expensive than the PlayStation 1 Classic because of all the extra work that has to go on in that controller.
I mean, a PlayStation 1 controller, and here's the thing, I get there's a lot of folks out there that like Nintendo 64. The controller is a bad design. It is a really confusing thing to hold. I think a lot of people out there don't realize when you compare the PlayStation 1 controller to the N64, and when you think about that, realize how many people just touched the PlayStation 1 controller, figured it out right away, then held a Nintendo 64 controller and didn't get it.
So the problem with the PS1 controller isn't within its design itself. Yes, it's easy to pick up and play because we've had controllers with buttons mapped like that. It's in the software and how that software utilizes those controllers, right?
Absolutely.
So there's so many pluses and minuses on both sides of
and
this.
that's the problem. So like the PlayStation controller will itself be cheaper, but that means that they're going to lose a lot of things on that.
And
so
Sony's getting so much negative feedback because of that controller. If Nintendo doesn't include the things that we remembered, like Rumble, in that original controller, or if that stick is off, if that stick doesn't feel like it used to, a lot of people are going to be angry.
Here's the thing to think about too, because usually we don't really get into the process of shipping these items and stuff like that. But think about the PlayStation. The PlayStation 1 controller weighs a lot less than the PlayStation DualShock controller.
Yes.
So the moment you do that, suddenly you're actually putting in a lot more of a deal there. Like it's gonna, I know what one box, not a big deal, but you're shipping a crate of these, suddenly the weight of that crate increases because whatever that size is, even if it's the tiniest size, it adds on. Think of it this way. This sounds ridiculous. Add one marshmallow to one bag, not a big deal. Add one marshmallow to 1,000,000 bags of marshmallows, suddenly it actually makes, adds weight.
That's a delicious comparison.
A delicious comparison, but it's a real thing. There's also the conflict, too, that if they were to make a true idea of a PlayStation Classic, do you use the DualShock controller or do you use the PlayStation analog controller?
Yeah, a lot of people don't remember that, is that there were more than one controller with the analog sticks.
Yes.
There was the one that came out originally that didn't have the rumble in it itself, and then there was the one afterwards.
That's right. There are two different ones, right? So which one do you do? Now, technically, honestly, if I were Sony, I would make that original one, right? Because it doesn't have the rumble in it. And if the idea that they're upset about having to pay immersion, if that is true, then there's nothing you have to worry about here. Done. Make that controller, and then we get that analog support.
I feel almost like we're past that now, though. Now that they've shown that classic controller, I think they're saying, hey, this is what you're getting. Unless fan outcry so big that suddenly they're like, no, you can buy this other controller. It's fine. Yeah, maybe we'll see that.
Maybe. I hope that we at least get the option to purchase a secondary controller that has those features in it, but who knows? It's a weird thing. Somebody mentioned to me, why don't you just release an adapter so you can plug in your original PlayStation controllers? Well, just like any controller, they're older and they're starting to not work as well as they are in the past. One of the great things about classic controllers is we get brand new official controllers straight from the manufacturer or the original creator of those controllers. So you're going to get a feel for that controller that feels new, and that's what I'm so excited about the Nintendo 64 Classic, to have a new N64 controller straight from Nintendo. To my knowledge, they haven't done a Nintendo 64 reprint ever.
And the reprints that we've seen of the NES Classic and SNES Classics, when you pick those up for the first time, you're like, oh,
yeah,
it's good.
Yeah, it's springier. It just feels like a tighter
It feels
design.
like you just bought a fresh, old school SNES system, holding that dog bone controller again for the first time.
And that's the thing, right? It's those little structural inconsistencies that they understand more than anyone else because they're the ones that actually made it. And with the Nintendo 64, I've used tons of third-party N64 controllers, and a couple of them are pretty good, but they're never quite as good as the originals. That's just the way that goes. And we're having the same problem with GameCube controllers, where we're always getting third-party companies making them, and Nintendo's a little bit sheepish on making more than themselves, and it causes problems, and it starts to become bigger and bigger as time goes along. But folks, this here is a complex thing. Let's just say this out.
I feel like we're getting off track a little bit. So can I say one thing really quick? So we're kind of theorizing that this will come out and butt heads with Sony, but this trademark is for a decade. So if it doesn't come out within December or shortly thereafter, I mean, they could release it any time within the next 10 years. The trademark's not up until 2027.
Yeah.
I think it's going to come out soon.
I'd be
this
shocked.
is like me throwing up my hands for legalities case. It's like they do have a 10-year time span within the release of this thing. I do think it's going to be released soon.
I honestly, I would be shocked. I'd be completely shocked if Nintendo didn't put their foot down and try to establish a presence.
Because it's like them stamping and saying, no, we're the classic console system.
Yeah. See, if they don't do that, right?
Yeah.
Remember, we're getting into Christmas, we're getting into the holidays, we're getting into seasons where people buy a lot of gifts for folks. When we get to that season, when we get to that time, you're going to see a lot, and I mean a lot of folks who are just going to look for a new classic system. Oh, I can't get an NES Classic? Oh, I can't get an SNES Classic? What's this? A PlayStation Classic? Well, maybe that's better than the other ones. So Sony can just basically rule the coop, and I don't think that Nintendo is in a position where they can allow that to happen to one of their cash cows.
Yeah, there may even be some sort of uneducated consumers out there, maybe mothers or grandmothers that don't know the difference between Sony and Nintendo, and they're like, classic console? My kids love the classic console, or my grandkids love the classic console, and they pick up a PS1 because they already picked up the NES. They already picked up the SNES. There's a lot going on here.
And I mean, another thing too with the Super NES Classic.
Yes.
One of the great things about that was that was one of the first times we got to see a game that was unreleased in Star Fox 2, right? And what's interesting about Star Fox and Star Fox 2 is those are 3D games, and modern gamers can look at those games that have never played a 2D game and go, oh, I understand what this is. And maybe they get a little bit lost with the 2D. This isn't like a thing that happens with everyone, but they're more accustomed to that. When they see a PlayStation, they'll know how to play those games because they'll see it and go, oh, it's a 3D game. Look.
Then they'll get the controller and go, oh, crap.
Let's just say this. For the PlayStation Classic, what if Tomb Raider comes out on it? What if Crash Bandicoot
Tomb Raider
comes out
2,
on it?
most likely,
Yeah. What if you get these games that are based upon franchises that are built right now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A Spyro game, perhaps.
Yeah. Look, Grand Theft Auto is the biggest thing in the world, but everybody doesn't remember where it really originated from.
Grand Theft Auto 2. It didn't originate on the PS1, but they sold very well on the PS1.
How about this? Grand Theft Auto, the original, and Grand Theft Auto London.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
London is one that not a lot of people played because it was an expansion pack to the original Grand Theft Auto. If that gets bundled in here, that's one of the only ways to play that in modern day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I gotta tell you, I don't really see this happening in a way where Sony isn't gonna put up a big fight and where it's not a competition because just knowing the library Sony can get, it could really just, like, I know a whole bunch of Nintendo fans are watching, and I get it, okay? You love the Nintendo 64. When I played the Nintendo 64 when it was, I think it was being shown off at an event, and I was so lucky. My mom knew I loved it. We went to this one place, or loved Nintendo, went to this one place, and nobody knew what it was. I think even at that point, they were still referring to it as, like, what I heard was Ultra 64. Yeah. So when I went there and I got to play Mario 64 and I held the controller and it all made sense and it was a 3D world, I was so blown away. But that experience isn't going to happen for modern gamers. If they're going to go back and get this thing, it's because they really liked what was back then. And Mario 64 is going to be a great game to play again. No doubt in my mind. But there's a big precedent there where there's going to be folks that might think the PlayStation library that is in the PlayStation Classic is a better library.
Yeah, man, I can't point in one direction or the other. I can't say that there's an obvious winner here. Nintendo is...
overall, it's PlayStation. I don't know if I said this correctly. The PlayStation library as a whole is better than the Nintendo 64 library.
I agree with that.
Not a competition.
But a PlayStation 1 Classic compared to an N64 Classic...
what do they pick?
If you say Mario right now on Twitter, it trends immediately.
Oh, sure.
Okay?
Absolutely.
If you say like Tomb Raider 2 or like Crash maybe, but no, Nintendo is still a powerhouse as far as its IP are concerned, and we're going to get 20
absolutely
first-party, probably first-party Nintendo games.
That is that is the thing, right?
Yeah, my hands are still up in the air, and I think it's going to be just a very interesting sort of battle if it does come to that, if we do see it released in December.
Just understand when it comes to the PlayStation, because of how easy it was to develop for that system, there are far more games on the PlayStation from third parties than there are on the Nintendo 64. And in some cases, when there was an N64 version of a game that was made at the same time it was made for PlayStation, sometimes the PlayStation version just a bit better.
Yep.
Like, I don't care if we get Resident Evil 2 on a PlayStation Classic, but on the N64, if you were to get the same thing, is that as good? you know, because like it's got downgraded graphics. Well, I mean, like it's got much higher resolution.
The FMVs are a little wonky too.
Yeah, right. You're going to get experiences like that. Are people going to be okay with that? Right? There's a library of games.
But then Nintendo just says Ocarina, Majora, Smash, Mario Kart. Like
absolutely.
People start foaming at the mouth.
No, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Those games are all great, right? But those are all Nintendo first-party games. And when you think of what Sony's going to play with here, they're likely going to be playing with completely different games. And remember, at the time, the Nintendo 64's games have aged. Some of them have aged fairly well and are still fun to play. But a lot of them, I would argue, like Smash Brothers, did not age as well.
For that argument, it's the same with the PS1.
It's true. It really is.
Yeah, that whole era.
It is. If we're, and I think, you know, I hate using that age type of thing because a game that was good back then is still a good game to me. I look at it from the time it was released, not at the time that it's in the future. But when I think of the racing games you can get on PlayStation, and when I think of the racing games you get on N64,
well, when I think of a kart racer, the one Crash Team Racing was good. But everyone loves Mario Kart.
You're right.
You know
like
what I mean?
That is the way to do that. But if it's such a confusing idea because look,
this is great.
These games that are popular on Nintendo platforms are still being made now, right? Those like okay, there's still a new Mario game. There's still a Nintendo 60, or there's still a new Mario Kart game. There is a brand new Mario Party game on the horizon. There's a new Smash Brothers game coming out. Like you literally have all these things still being made now. When it comes to the PlayStation Classic,
they've announced Final Fantasy. They've announced Ridge Racer. They've announced Tekken. These are all still going,
right? But how about Twisted Metal? Right? How about Tomba? How about those games that are really good, but people didn't know too much about them?
Yeah, we'll have to see.
This is how Sony can really get in there and make an impact. And you know, it'll be even better if they actually just have some hidden games that they don't talk about. Just locked away things. Remember, this is Sony doing it, right? Sony can do whatever they want. Nintendo, they've got their thing. They know exactly what they're doing. They're not going to move away from that. But if Sony really wants to have an impact, they got to play hardball. They got to be willing to do some crazy
I
stuff.
feel like they're punching out in this case, and I guess we just have to wait and see what happens. We just keep going. I mean, we could talk about this for hours on end, I'm sure, but
folks, what do you think? What are you more excited to play, a Nintendo 64 classic or a PlayStation classic? Let's see what everyone says. Let us know in the comments below.